Okay, let's get started into the second lesson, into the second hour of today's lesson. And this time, in this hour, we want to talk about doing the search. We will start with searching for a single word. Single word search is relatively simple because we need to look for a single word in the title, in the description, and in the tags. The more difficult question is, where should we put the search logic? I could think of 3 different places, and I would like to discuss with you where I should put it. I could put it in the program.cs directly inside of the web API. That would be one option. I can put it directly into the database context. This is our DB context. It could be a method in the database context. Then everybody who has the database context has access to our search logic. Or the third option would be a separate class. What do you think? What would you do? Would you put it directly in the web API? Would you put it in the database context? Or would you put it in a separate class, and why? We can definitely agree on not putting it in the web API. Do not put it in the web API in a real-world project, because that would be spaghetti code. You know, single responsibility pattern, a piece of code should perform one specific task. And if the task is implement a web API, it should be implementing web API, and not implement the web API and implement the search logic. So we will not put it in the web API. Now, when it comes to putting it in the database context or in a separate class, the answer is more difficult to give. Because if you have a very small application and you just have, let's say, a handful of methods which are related to your database context, why not putting it in the database context? It doesn't hurt anybody. It's just there. If you don't need it, just ignore it. I mean, we're talking about a handful of methods. But if you are doing a bigger application with more functionality, then I'm with you. Then I'm for the separate class. Because then the database context would be too large. It would be hard to find whatever you look for. So go for the database context if you have a single app, a single app with just a few functionalities, and go for the separate class for larger applications. Let's just simulate for today that we are doing a larger application. So let's practice the separate class approach. It's the cleaner approach, okay? Let's try that one. So please add to the data library a new class, and let's call this class offering search. I will use the new syntax with the namespace on the top without the indentation, but it's completely up to you whether you want to do that. Offering search. The first thing is really simple, exactly the same as we had before. Let's add a constructor, CTOR tab. Let's add a database context, share for future database context, generate the field, save it in the field, and we are good. Now let's set up the basic functionality, the basic method signature for our application, public. What will be the result? The result will be a query result, so therefore it will be an iQueryable of. The question is, what are we going to give back? Let's say offerings, because we are looking for offerings. And let's call it single word search LINQ, because we are going to use LINQ in the first example. We will take the filter string as a parameter, and that's it. That looks like a nice method signature, so I think we should stick to that. iQueryable is an interface representing the result of a query. That is why it's called an iQueryable. Let's do a context, and what do we want to return? Well, the offerings. We want to return the offerings. We want to filter the offerings, so we have to use a where. O represents an offering. First, The filter could be in the title. O.title.contains filter. First one. The filter could also be in the description. O.description contains filter. But the filter could also be in the tags. So we say O.tags.any. If any of the tags t.tag contains filter, then we also have a hit. So that simply says if the filter is in the title, or the filter, this one is wrong, by the way, it's description, or the filter is in the description, or the filter is in any tag. I already told you that if you query something from the database which will never be altered, you can turn off so-called object tracking. Can you remember what it is? So what we can do is we can say as no, now it's good, as no tracking. Maybe you need another using, yes, you need another using statement for that. And that's essentially it. We can immediately return it. Woohoo! It's as simple as that. Should we give it a try? I'm definitely curious whether it works, so let's go into the program file. And we do exactly what we did before. So extend our dependency injection, builder.services.add_scoped. And this time it's the offer search. What was it? Search. Why isn't it here? Maybe I forgot the public. Yes, here. Sorry, I did a mistake. Let's make the class public, and then I can say offer search. That will make the offering search logic available through dependency injection. And with that, we can define an app map get. Let's say offers search async offer search searcher and string filter. And I think if I am not wrong, this is a one-liner. We just say searcher dot single word search link filter. Essentially, I don't need the async here because we don't have an await, and we don't have an await. The only thing we have to specify the HTTP code that we want to return. So let's put a result.ok around this stuff. Results.ok. That adds the HTTP 200 response code to our result of the query. To make it really good, we can say the filter is optional, and we can do a so-called coalesce operator and specify that if the user didn't specify a filter, let's take an empty string as the filter. And now I'm happy. Get HTTP localhost 7070 offering, did I call it offerings? Offers, okay. Offers search filter chair. Maybe we have some chairs. Let's see. Do we get some chairs? Yes, I get chairs. And I see immediately that we have chairs. Looks good. And if you take a look at the query that was generated, here is the query. See? You have the query with the select statement and offerings, and we have a subselect from the tags. It really looks nice. It looks okay-ish. So we were successful. We didn't write very efficient code, but we wrote code that works. And that's always a good idea. Let's start with something that works, and from there, optimize it. You see, LINQ is really useful. For such cases, LINQ is really great. It works perfectly fine. I have one big complaint about this solution. Let's take a look here at what we get back. We get the ID, the title, the description, the condition, the last successful availability verification, the images, the subcategory, the tags, and so on and so on. We don't need all that. When you showed us your solution, you made it perfectly right. You said, I don't need everything. I just need title, description, and ID. That should be okay. So, why not do exactly that? Why not return exactly an object that contains only the things that we really need? Because currently, we are loading the entire data set from the database server to the application server. And then we send everything down the wire to Angular. And Angular will pick only 3 fields from all this data and present it to the user. Why do we send around so much data that nobody needs? We shouldn't do that. Never. Remember that. It's important. So, what we need to practice next is how can we build a result object? A result object that we can use to return a kind of offering summary to the end user. You have a question? Exactly. Select is the correct thing. So what we could do is we could say dot select O goes to, let's create a new object here, something like this, and say we want to have the title, we want to have the description, not the sharings, but the description, and we also want to have the ID. Looks good. Okay, but now we get a mistake. Now we get an error. Because the anonymous type is not compatible with offering. We could create a record, for instance. We can also create a class for that. We essentially have to create a new class. You can choose whether you want to have a record or a class. We have to create a class that represents the result. And this is exactly what we need to do. Please follow along. Please go into the offerings file. And here, somewhere after offerings, we will create a new class. I will call it offering summary. You can call it whatever you want. And this offering summary has essentially the ID, the title, and the description. I will copy it from above so I don't have to type so much. So here, just the ID, the title, and the description. That's it. See it? Let's create, as we did it before, a new entity type configuration class. We discussed that when we created this data model. I hope you can remember it. And let's change it from offering entity type to offering summary entity type. Let's here change it to offering summary. Let's here change it to offering summary. That looks good. And there is essentially only one thing that I would like to specify. I would like to say builder dot has no key. Has no key means in this case that it's a so-called keyless entity. That means that entity framework should ignore the ID, because what we get back here is not a table. It doesn't have a unique index or something like this. It's just another property, this ID thing here. With this, I can suppress that entity framework thinks that this ID represents a primary key. Then we can take the offering summary and use it as the resulting entity, and it should, if we add ID equals and title equals and description equals, the reds quickly should go, offering summary, of course. Go away. Nice. Now if you want to give it a try, just run it. Go into your request. And if the demo bots are smiling, yeah, we see, oh, ID, title, description. Great, exactly what we wanted to have. Now we are not sending unnecessarily large results over the wire. We are downloading only those columns from the database that we really need, and we are sending only those results to the Angular client that the Angular client really needs. I have one last thing for you, and this is the advanced part of this exercise. I would like to return, listen closely, a comma-separated value list of all the tags. Because we were looking in the title, we were looking in the description, and from a marketing perspective, it makes sense to display the user all the tags of the offering, right? So how can we generate a comma-separated list of all the tags? And it turns out that this is surprisingly simple. Let me show you how that works. First, we add a new property. Here, a property, let's call it string tags, and give it a default value. This is just string.empty. So now, inside of the offering search, we can simply say tags equal. The question is, how do we get it? And luckily, C# and LINQ support an operator which is called string.join. So what I can say is I can say string.join, take all the offering, first I have to specify the separator, and then I simply specify that I would like to go for the tags and take, select, t goes to t.tag, select the tag, and make all this stuff. No, I think it's done. I think that's it. We don't need to turn it into an array manually. You see, we just say, look for the tags, take the string tag, and join all the string tags with a comma. Isn't that nice? This is now iterating over an end-to-end relationship, something which is really not simple to do, and it works like a charm. Hopefully. Let's give it a try. Let's run it. And, come on. Yes, see it? Now this is just a single word search. Compare it to your solution. Your solution was really good, but your solution downloaded a lot of data to the web server, and then from the web server to the Angular client. And this solution, we are really handing over the entire search logic to the database server. The database server does the heavy lifting, and we only get back those data items that we really need to process. Understood? It's the simple thing with a single word. It's getting more complex when we do the multi-word search. But we still have a little bit of time today in the lesson, so we can take a look for it. Breathe in, breathe out. Now it's getting interesting. What we will do is we will now take a look at something which is really useful sometimes. Because before we go into the multi-word search, I would like to show you how we could, if we want, optimize this query by using a custom SQL statement. If you take a very close look at the SQL query that is generated by Entity Framework, you could find some things that you might not like in this case. So, I want to be smarter than Entity Framework. I want to write my own query. Let's do that, okay? Let's try that. Let's go into our Azure Data Studio, open up a new query window here, and then let's try to write the query by hand. Now, this is not a database course. You have probably learned about databases before, so what I did is I came up with some sample SQL statements. So what you can do is you can go into GitHub and look for this file here. tag filter queries. And we need to have the first lines here, the first 14 lines. You can copy them, paste them here, and if you run it, you should get a result similar to the one that we just had. Let's quickly analyze this SQL statement. We haven't taken a very close look at SQL statements in this course, so I really don't know whether you are rather beginners in terms of SQL or whether you already have a black belt in terms of SQL. I have to make, I have to tell you that I love SQL. I've spent, I think, 15 years of my life mostly writing SQL queries. Really spending days and days and days sifting over pages-long SQL queries. It's such a great technology. It's so perfect. I love it. It's really, really powerful. So, no, it's really good. No, it's really good. I really like it. I really, really like it. Now, let's quickly analyze what we do here. And you will see that it's not really complicated. Try to follow, please. We start with the offerings, because this is what we are looking for. The next two lines should be pretty obvious because they are very, very similar to what we had before. We are using the SQL LINQ clause. The LINQ clause does exactly what we want if we add a percentage character at the beginning and at the end. Understand what I mean? There would also be a SQL operator which is called char index. You could also use it. And then I'm doing a subquery here. Subquery means that for every offering, I'm checking if there is at least one offering tag where the tag is like the filter. So this works perfectly fine. If you want to return only those columns that we really need, well, that's simple. Just say o.id, next line o.title, next line o.description, but now we have a problem. Because now we really want to have a comma-separated list of tags. And how can we generate a comma-separated list of tags? Well, with another subquery. Isn't that awesome? So what we can do is we can say select whatever, I don't know it yet, let's say star, from, and now we simply copy what we have down here. See? Because we already have the join to offering tags. So I can copy this stuff, and that will give me all the offering tags for my current offering. And then, let me tell you a secret, there is a string aggregation function in SQL where you can just say, give me the tags and separate them with a comma. That's it. So SQL can do the comma separated value on its own. You don't need LINQ for that. You don't need C# for that. SQL can do that. Maybe let's call it as tags. And if you run this guy, we should see a nice little result with the ID, title, description, and the tags. Don't worry, I have created this SQL statement for you. The point is not to show you how great SQL is. The point is that sometimes in real world, you need to write your own SQL statements. And I want to demonstrate to you how you can do that with Entity Framework. That's the point. That is what I want to show you, okay? So 99 out of 100 queries will work perfectly fine with Entity Framework. But then you will have this one little query which is simply too slow, or where Entity Framework simply doesn't support something that your underlying database could do for you. And then you want to go directly to the database. And this is what we are practicing here, right? Good. So don't worry, I will not make this a database course. So I created the necessary function for you. Go into the offering search in GitHub, And there you will find a method which says single word search SQL. We will copy it to our code in a second. But the point that I want you to understand, and please look at the video beamer now, is that it is super simple to use something like this in Entity Framework if you know the function from SQL raw. So what you can do is you can paste in your entire select statement with all the greatness of SQL, and Entity Framework will allow you to pass this thing through to the database. The only thing that you have to do is you have to specify the parameters inside of SQL using a class which is called SQL parameter. Understood? This gives you the complete freedom of SQL from within Entity Framework. Good? Let's try that. So please copy the single word SQL. This is not a database course, so we will not spend an endless amount of time discussing the SQL statement. You can take a look at it on your own, and we paste it here into our code. Yes, I know, we get a mistake, we get an error, a syntax error. We will fix that in a second. It should be a method in offering search. The question is it okay to use the LINQ query instead of this one because you like the LINQ query more? Yes, of course. But guess what? In the homework, you had a second part. It was called multi-word search. And there, I consciously designed it like that. You simply can't come up with a solution, LINQ. LINQ doesn't support it. So there, we will need it. So it makes sense to practice it first in this simple example, and then in the next hour, we will go deeper, because then we have a use case where we can't use LINQ anymore. Understand what I want to do? Practice it simple, and then try to use it in a more complex use case, where we really benefit from that. Now the filtered offers here is an extension that we need to do in the database context. And that is really simple. You already know how to do that. I will show it to you. Go into the share for future database context and simply add another DB set. It will return an offer, It will return an offering summary, this one, and simply put it just like always, offering summary, like that. Let me make it larger here. That's all you have to do. Nothing special. I would like to see whether it works. So all I do is I copy this map get, the entire map get, and maybe call it now search SQL, something like this. And this time I will not search LINQ, but I will call search SQL. So that we have both options for us to try. Come on, here, Visual Studio Code, exactly. Let's copy this one. And this time we'll go for search SQL. And crossing fingers. Waiting, 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 and here you are. See? Works perfectly fine. And this time, if you take a look at the output, you see that Entity Framework will execute exactly the SQL statement that you specified. It will not try to come up with anything else. It will use what you told it to do. So you have the possibility to optimize if you need it. If LINQ generates a query which is not optimized enough, try to optimize your LINQ query. If you still can't come up with a proper LINQ solution, then go towards SQL. The problem with SQL is that it is database specific. If you write a complex SQL query, it might work on SQL Server, but maybe it doesn't work on Postgres or it doesn't work on Oracle. With LINQ, it's relatively simple to stay database independent. If you go for handwritten SQL, it's harder to stay database independent. But in many companies, you have one clear choice of database. Many companies are either a SQL Server company or an Oracle company or a MySQL company or a Postgres company. They generally use one kind of database. In such situations, you frequently see handcrafted SQL queries in order to achieve proper performance. 1:40, so in 10 minutes we are going to continue, and in 10 minutes we are going to build a multi-word search, and there you will see some new features when it comes to migrations. Okay? Nice.